Good morning, Rick.
Good morning, Dom.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It seems like you and I have had a couple of preparatory calls getting ready for today's interview. I'm glad to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm raring to go. I'm excited about doing the podcast today.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. So, Rick, welcome to Cabinet Maker Profit System Podcast. As our listeners and viewers will soon find out, you're very familiar with the cabinet making industry.
Yes, I am. I am actually a cabinet maker by trade. Started getting my trade back in the early 80s with a company in Edmonton, Canada, called Matson's Custom Cabinets, and went on then to become the foreman for that company. Left that company and did a couple of stints with some other companies as a foreman, and then became an engineer, doing a lot of programming and cutting lists, project management as well. And then later on worked for a large company called Sunac, was the plant manager there. And we had about 80 people, and primarily we did high-end retail store fixtures in the US.
Oh, okay.
Stores like Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, Harry Winston, and those kind of stores. Worked in primarily the larger cities in the States, New York, and Bal Harbour and Rodeo Drive. So, and even the store in Hawaii, and we did also the
Fun.
Louis Vuitton in Mexico City. So yeah, a lot of experience there with the millwork industry, cabinet making industry. Understand all the issues right from the general contractor, architects and designers, as well as the whole production side of things, and then the installation, and even familiar with the billing cycles and the issues
all the
with
fun
AR
stuff.
and all the fun stuff. So the full gambit, got that under my belt experience-wise, yes.
Wow.
And then I moved out of industry in about 2010 and got hired on by a company called FP Innovations.
That's where you are now.
They're not.
Yeah.
That's where I am now. Yeah, FP Innovations. They're a not-for-profit forest research institute. We've got labs in Canada and a lot of people that work also abroad in the US now. We're opening up some centers there and helping a lot of the US-based industry. So we do everything from the seedling tree right to finished wood products. So seedling tree, forestry, sawmills, pulp and paper, and finished wood products and fiber acquisition and all the thing about bioindustry. So anything to do with wood, we're into that. We've got the research knowledge base behind that.
That is insanely interesting. So truly cradle, I don't want to say cradle to grave, but from seedling to reinvention to finished wood products, and then to dealing, I suppose, even with recycled pulp and fiber.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, anything to do with wood or wood cells or wood fibers or anything to do with the trees, we have our tentacles into it, and we're interested, and we've got a lot of research behind that, and a lot of bright people working for the organization.
Well, you're also involved with AMAC a lot, Architectural
Yes,
Woodworking Manufacturers Association, and
Yes.
that's why I have you as a guest today, because we're going to talk about the foreman, this position that really is a quarterback in many ways for the efficiency and the effectiveness and the quality control that we have in our shops. For we're bringing the contracts to life through that foreman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of my work with AMAC, AMAC is also linked together with AWI in the States, so we work very closely there. We actually have developed for many years now a standards manual on how to properly build millwork, and so that's the North American Architectural Woodwork Standards. Yep. And so my job now with FP Innovations and AMAC takes me to many different woodworking shops, and a lot of times I'm asked by the company to come in there and take a look, do a diagnostic, talk to the people, let us know what you see, outside set of eyes. What do you see? So yeah, different perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, you know, if a company, they've got their blinders on, they're working hard, they're working, you know, to get that job out the door. There's tight timelines, the budgets are tight. They've got their blinders on. They don't see beyond what they actually are working on at that particular moment. So a lot of times I will come in and do a diagnostic when I'm asked. It usually takes me 2 or 3 days to kind of look and see what's happening and study and just watch. And what I've seen, it's sort of a trend that I've seen 80 or 90% of the time.
Yeah.
The foreman, who in my experience and in my understanding of the position, should be on the floor 80% of the time, doing things like making sure that the production is flowing, making sure that the quality is being met, making sure that the safety standards are being upheld, and generally keeping costs down so things like rework isn't happening.
Yeah.
80% of the time, the foreman's time should be spent on the floor. But what I'm finding is that very little of their time is being spent on the floor. It's more 80% of the time is in their office, in front of their computer, doing work-related things like answering emails and maybe even some project management work and talking to the installers and talking to the customers. But that's not really, in my mind, what the position is. The position should be them being on the floor and looking after those 4 key vital areas, which I already outlined: production, quality, safety, and keeping costs down.
Let me just.
And I would challenge those. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So I want to, because people might be taking notes while they're listening to this.
Okay.
And might be driving. So let's repeat those again. When the foreman should be on the floor looking after production.
Yeah. The quality.
Yeah.
The safety. And in general, just making sure that the costs are being kept down. So what I mean by that is things like making sure that the amount of rework is minimal. Making sure that we're not incurring overtime costs. And we all know that overtime costs creep into some of these jobs. But the problem is the company didn't price the job with overtime in it. So if you're incurring overtime, what does that mean? It's cutting into your profit margins, right?
Yeah. And then the other thing is just general efficiencies. You know, the amount of time that you've got a high-priced, skilled tradesman going and picking stuff off the shelves, that's low value work for that person. You could have a laborer picking panels and pieces and bringing it to that higher skilled tradesman, keeping those hourly rates in line. So even, you know, not to get into lean manufacturing, but every step is worth $1.
That's right. That's right. So, you know, and that's all covered under production, right? So if the foreman is out walking the floor, they're looking after production, and really there's a lot of things under production. So it's things like making sure that the equipment is being maintained, proper maintenance. So we have total productive maintenance. So that means talking to the operator, making sure they're following the maintenance procedures, making sure the machine is running. There's no machine downtime, because if we have machine downtime, that affects production, right? The quality, so that the rework levels aren't there, that the quality is being maintained. So in order to maintain quality, a lot of times what the foreman is responsible for doing is making sure that the training is happening, so that the people are properly trained and are actually doing what they're supposed to do, that the safety is being maintained. And safety, for me, has 2 components. Yes, safety is primarily keeping the people safe so they're not going to be getting hurt or injured.
Yeah.
But in the secondary part of that for me is making sure there's no property losses. So there's no equipment damage, there's no building damage, things like that. So even though, you know, a dolly may fall over with product on it and nobody was in the area, so nobody got hurt, hey, that's great. But we still have property loss. We still have rework. You know, we have to rework that product, right? So that's a component that needs to be fall primarily under the foreman's job to look after, right? And then just keeping the costs down so that, you know, the workflow is efficient and effective. So you can't do that from your office. So if you're in your office and answering emails, maybe that's what upper management is asking you to do, but maybe upper management then, you know, I challenge them to look at that and say, do we actually need another position to effectively answer those emails if that's what you need to do. But don't use the foreman to do that, because the foreman's job is to be on the floor 80% of the time.
Production management. Yeah, well, those questions that come to purchasing and quite often then would fall to the estimator. In a lot of companies, they'll say the estimator is also in charge of purchasing and making sure those conversations happen. I think a big part of this as well is communication. The foreman has to communicate with the office, wherever that is, next door or upstairs or next building over. But there has to be really good communication between the foreman and the office and the foreman and the floor. That's why I say it's the quarterback.
Exactly, and that communication has to be in the form of a face-to-face communication between the workers and the foreman, and relaying any issues with engineering or project management. The foreman's kind of the go-between, and he's actually understanding what needs to happen, and he can go back on a face-to-face. And if it can't be face-to-face, pick up the phone. I've worked with a lot of companies where they spent a lot of time on emailing, then a question comes from either the project manager or from the site supervisor, site person, and you get into this email war or email answering back and forth. And a lot of times, you know what? Pick up the phone and you can solve that issue in 2 or 3 minutes and move on. But we think we're communicating effectively by using email, and we're really not. So for me, I even limit what I do today. I limit my emails. I'm very selective on what I answer. And a lot of times I'll get a request from somebody and I'm going to I tell myself right away, this is going to take a long time for me to answer email. I'm pick up the phone and I talk to them and we can solve this thing in a minute or two.
That's true. There is this new transition. There's communication that can be done on texting. Then there's communication that can be done by email. And then finally, you've just got to look at it and go, I could solve this so much faster by picking up the phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just pick up the phone. It's a magical tool. It gets you right into the other person's ear, into their brain. You got that line-to-line communication right away. No interruptions.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, it has to be taken in context, of course. Sometimes it's better to do it email-wise. You're a long distance away. I get that. And you can't find the person, you know, you play telephone tag. I get that. Well, if you're doing that, then set up an appointment via email. Hey, I'll call you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Be available for my phone call. Boom. Now you've got an appointment. You can pick up the phone and you can discuss whatever the issue is and get those things sorted out. Right.
When you do
really, you know, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Rick. I was going to say, just on this communication track here, thinking about this foreman really sitting in the middle between the office and the floor. What do you like to see, or what are the good news stories you have of a foreman running a meeting with the floor? How often are they doing that? What's the focus of those meetings? Or could you come back at me and say, no, meetings don't work. We don't do that. We just go to work every day, show up, punch the clock. What works best for communicating?
Well, what I've seen work the best for communicating is when companies do the 5-minute huddle, the daily huddle. Right. And a lot of times the foreman is involved in that. And so they meet for 5 minutes a day. It's the same time every day. Everyone is required to be there. And if it's by department, that's fine. If you have a larger organization, you may have 4 or 5 different huddles happening. You might have a project management engineering huddle. You might have one in panel processing. You have one in assembly and so on. So it depends on the size of the organization. But you have a 5-minute huddle, and in those 5 minutes, there's an agenda. And you actually talk about those 4 things we already talked about: production, quality, safety, and keeping the costs down. And it's 5 minutes. You talk about what happened in the past 24 hours. Did we hit our production targets? Usually companies have KPIs or key performance indicators, so they know where they're at. And if they didn't hit their production, you talk about why, what are some of the issues, what do we need to correct for today, so that we can hit our targets for today. And then you talk about any quality issues that came up in those last 24 hours, any safety issues. And you also then engage the people to maybe come forth with some ideas to make some improvements so that you don't have these things happening again and again and again. So you come to the root cause of what caused some of these issues, and then you make some corrections moving forward. So again, a lot of that, people are familiar with lean manufacturing or continuous improvement. Those are some of those things that those people who are practicing that actually employ.
Yeah.
Right. But anyway, this 5-minute a day meeting, it sets the stage. It gets out of the way any issues. It gets you to the root causes of what caused you grief in the last 24 hours. And then you can implement some improvements moving forward so you don't run into these over and over again.
Yeah. You know that we've had a podcast episode here with a gentleman named Ankit Sharma from Ric Ptak. And I had the opportunity to actually be in his office during his huddle, his 5-minute daily huddle. And it was run really well. So I asked him to be a guest on our podcast. I think it was posted May the 3rd. So what I'll do is in the show notes for today is we will post this, based on Ric's endorsement of doing a huddle, a link back to Ankit's podcast as well. So if anybody needs to see what a huddle looks like, Ankit walks you through it. And it's a pretty powerful tool. I've seen companies that use it and those that don't. And that kind of communication and accountability really impacts a company in the right way.
Yeah, I agree. Some of the other things that I can sort of share with you from my experience, a lot of these places I'll go do a diagnostic at, and there'll be this us versus them culture. You've got engineering and project management, and then you've got the production floor. And invariably, I always talk to one, and they always blame the other department for the issues. And I say, guy, you're one company. There's not two separate companies here.
Yeah.
Engineering, project management, and production have to work together. So take away this barrier, take away this us versus them culture. You're a team, so you have to work together. How do you do that? You already mentioned about the communication that has to happen.
Yeah.
And there has to be, a no blame environment. Yes, we did something wrong. So let's fix it so that it doesn't happen tomorrow or next week again, right? And you're only going to get that if the foreman is walking the floor, if he's got good communication with all his operators and his people on the bench, and then he can take those concerns back to the other departments if that's where sort of the problems generated, and he say, look, let's work together so that we can help each other, right? So we have, everybody has to clean up their own backyard. I mean, production has a lot of things that they can do better when I come do these diagnostics.
Right.
And so can project management, engineering, but at the end of the day, you still have to work together, right?
Yeah. I think that's the key, is that business itself is a just constant reinvention. We should always be looking for making things better. And you really nailed it when you said it's not about blame. It's just a situation. Let's just fix the situation. It has nothing to do with the person. Fix the situation. And if the person happens to be the challenge because of the attitude or their approach or being late for work or some other challenges, then that's something you can deal with. But that's very different than the paint isn't getting we're not getting the right paint color, but it's probably because we don't have the right system. We're not following the recipe or the process.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Dom. It's about process. First, you have to make sure that you have the correct process. If your process isn't correct or isn't clearly understood by everyone who's using it, you are invariably going to have issues or problems crop up. So first of all, make sure your process is sound.
Yeah.
Once the process is sound, then train everybody to follow that process and then just hold them accountable. And who's the person again who's going to do that? It's going to fall on the foreman's job. Now, the foreman may have a couple of lead hands. Well, then he's going to lean on them to make sure, and then the lead hands are going to report back to him if the organization has a large number of people on the floor. But still, there's a system in place for the foreman to make sure that everybody's being held accountable to follow the correct process.
This foreman person, I'm going to say this foreman guy, it's easy for a lot of us to think that your highest skilled technical guy should become the foreman. Is that always the case?
It's not always the case, and in a lot of times that doesn't really work. And I tell you, it happened to me. I was considered one of the higher skilled bench people.
Yeah.
So of course, Rick, you want to be the foreman? Yeah, sure, I want to be the foreman. I'm young, ambitious, and get another job title, maybe a raise. That's all good stuff.
Yeah.
But nobody taught me any people skills, how to handle people.
That's where I was going on that. That's the
And
people.
so now you have to deal with people issues and people problems, and everybody's different. So again, the foreman needs these skills. How are they going to get them? They don't get them in cabinet making school. They don't get, normally, you know, when you're an apprentice, you learn how to do the technical part really well, but nobody teaches the people skills. So, you know, I do, or FP Innovations also offers that, you know, training within industry is one of the tools. We're not the only people that can do that. I mean, you can look for these courses. There are other providers that offer them. But what they do is that they give the foreman and the supervisors the necessary tools to then handle things like people problems.
Right.
That's called job relations training if we talk about TWI, or training within industry. But another J course is job instruction training, you know, how to properly train people. And then there's job methods training, you know, how to make the best use of materials, manpowers, and machines that you currently have available, right? So you're using them effectively and efficiently. So there's all kinds of courses available out there if you want to give your foreman the best tools in his toolbox to be the foreman, be the supervisor, right?
So we've got listeners right now, or viewers perhaps if they're watching this on YouTube, who are owners of shops, right? So the people that listen to this show are cabinet makers, architectural mill workers, furniture makers, and they're the owners of these shops, and they're thinking about this foreman position. And you're coming back, you're an industry expert from a really high level perspective, who's also gone into many, many shops. And you're saying we should be investing in our people, investing in that foreman, and giving him or her, I'll just say, but in giving him training on people skills more than technical. You know, we're going to assume a certain level of technical proficiency here, but it's really about people skills.
I think that's the key, because the technical skills are probably already exist, and it's the people skills a lot of times that are lacking. My people skills came from trial and error, school of hard knocks.
Yeah.
You know, you did something that didn't work out. You lost a good employee because you didn't handle it properly. Yeah. And then you say, well, now I know what not to do next time. But in the meantime, you can't turn back the hands of time. So
no, and people are so different.
Yeah. What I'm suggesting is, you know, go out and look for the tools that are going to make your supervisor a really strong supervisor, the people skills. They need that, right? Yeah. And it's people skills is talking face to face. It's understanding what the frustrations are for the operators, and then working with them to solve those things or make it easier for them to do their job, right?
So if I'm an owner of a company and I'm thinking of getting a foreman, regardless, you know, so we're either growing to the point where we need a foreman, or maybe our foreman has moved on, and so now we're looking at our roster of people. Who do you think on our floor would be giving us the indicators that they'd be a good next foreman? What would you be looking for in a foreman's skills if they were already in the company?
Well, what I typically look for is people who ask a lot of questions, people who say, well, what about if we did it like this? I mean, these natural leaders, or people with these leadership abilities, they generally surface to the top. And upper management owners just have to listen, you know, to figure out who might be, you know, these people who are the next potential supervisors or the leaders of the company. Yeah. Because let's face it, eventually these young, eager people who have these questions, who are questioning, isn't there a better way to do things? Maybe their ideas are kind of out in left field, but at least they're thinking about it. At least they want to get some input back. Yeah. And these are going to be the next owners of companies looking, you know, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. These are going to be the owners of these companies. So why not nurture that out of them and give them the opportunity and the necessary skills, and see if they can grow those skills and become one of your leaders on your shop floor, right? Yeah. I mean, a supervisor really gets results through people. That's what happens, right? So if you have a good supervisor, you get results. That means your production is high. That means you get the job out on time with minimal issues, meaning the quality is high. There aren't, you know, very little safety concerns. We don't have a lot of people getting hurt and then missing time, you know, time off work, and your WCB rates go up. The schedule gets whacked out of kilter because now I'm missing the guy on the CNC. So now it's not, you know, my production isn't running. And in general, the costs are down. So this is what we mean when we say, look, the foreman is an important position. So give it the importance it deserves. Give your foreman the necessary tools in their toolbox so that they can do their job effectively. And then, you know, that will mean the profit margins will be where you're expecting them to be.
Yeah. You know, it just occurred to me, and maybe perhaps to you and I, because we go into a lot of shops and we see this, but I think it's worth repeating that foreman needs to be on their shop floor meetings. You call them toolbox meetings or huddle, whatever it is, but they also need to be in the office meetings. You know, you mentioned the us versus them. That right. Foreman is the person who carries the information back and forth. So if there's office meetings, even where you're talking about finance and operations and purchasing, there are probably certain meetings that are appropriate for the foreman to be in. So he's got an ear in both camps, and he knows how to, you know, advise the leaders and say, hey, you know, we might have a problem or we might have an opportunity. But he also has a way to tell the guys on the floor, hey, listen, there's a big job coming, and we got to pump this one out because we're going to get hit by a huge wave pretty soon. And so he needs to be in between both of those things.
That's right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head again, Dom. Job relations teaches that. Job relations is a two-way relationship. It's between the ownership and upper management to the foreman, and it's from the foreman back to them. But then the foreman also, walks that middle of the line where he's got to balance the upper management and ownership with the production floor. So the communication goes all across every point there. So it means then, if you have good communications, usually it's going to happen everywhere. It has to be open and honest. It has to be a no blame environment. You know, we understand we had an issue yesterday. Let's just fix it. What do we need to do to get it fixed? What do we need to change? And understanding that, going to the next level. A lot of companies, what they'll do, they'll have they'll blame each other. They'll blame the economy. They'll blame the environment. They'll blame the suppliers. They'll blame the general contractors. But guess what? There's a lot of stuff they can work on in their own camp to fix and make better. And a lot of times, all that is better communication skills, right? Yeah. And communication skills is one of those tools that certainly, if you have a supervisor or foreman and you feel they could benefit from that, then find some effective courses for them to engage with and engage in, and then practice that, hold them accountable to start using some of those skills. And it takes time. It's not going to change overnight, but if there's a concerted effort and if management is behind it and they support it, things will change. Yeah. Slowly over time. They'll get better.
It has to be constant, an understanding that it's constant and never ending improvement. When we talk about from a business coaching perspective, which I think is very similar to what you do there, Rick, at FP Innovations, is kind of a business coaching thing, is people who are below the line, they place blame, they make excuses, they're negative, they're in denial, and they're in scarcity. But what happens is, let's say the foreman has that personality style of being a blamer. Well, what he's doing is actually allowing other people to be blamers too. Because now your journeyman can blame his apprentice. The apprentice can blame the receiver. The receiver can blame the guy who dropped off the materials in the truck. And now you've just got a culture of blame in the company. I should add that if the owner has a behavioral style where they blame everybody, that just filters all the way through the company. And this might only be funny to business coaches, but we do have a joke about that, which is that whenever I'm placing blame and I'm pointing at you, there's 3 fingers pointing back at me.
Yeah, I mean, that's, sometimes people don't understand that, but you're right, culture plays a big part of it. What is your culture? Understanding the culture of your organization. And if your organization does have that sort of blaming culture, then that's going to take a bit of effort to turn that around and change that around. And it's going to have to be done with a strategic, and probably a coach would be the right way to address that, so you have a strategic plan of how you're going to change culture over time. And again, not everybody's going to buy into it. If you can shift 75 to 80% of the people in your organization over in a year and a half to 2 or 3 years, and that's kind of what I'm seeing in my estimation and in my experience level, that's how long it takes to change culture. If you can get 75 or 80% of them, you've done your job, because the other 20%, you're probably not going to be able to shift them. I mean, they're probably going to have to exit over time, through attrition or retirement. But then at least the new people you're hiring, now you've developed this new culture. At least the new people you're bringing are adapting that new culture, and so now you're going to get the culture you're looking for over time.
You might have a really good perspective on this, Rick, and this wasn't part of the Foreman conversation, but this culture question is really important. And so this is where this next phase of this interview is going to go. I used to think culture was nothing but pink fluffy clouds, rainbows and unicorn poop. It means nothing. And what I've learned over time is that actually culture is everything. Because when I have the right people on my team with the right culture, we can actually do anything. But if I have the wrong people on my team, everything is impossible. And so let me ask you, have you, when you've gone out to visit different sites, different shops, and it sounds like you've seen a whole different spectrum of them, have you seen two shops where one's got a tough culture, like a blame culture, and one's got a real winning culture, and how they operate differently?
Oh yeah, you see that quite often, and it's always interesting, because it doesn't take long to figure out what the culture of an organization is as an outside set of eyes, for me at least anyway. Culture is very interesting, because culture is exactly what is happening on the shop floor. It's not what you think is happening. It's not what the owners think happens in project management or on the shop floor. It's actually, you walk down and you actually see what's happening, and that's the culture, right? Yes. So there's no denying, when you come in, an outside set of eyes are watching an operation on the floor, watching an operator, or watching a process, or watching cabinets or doors being processed. It doesn't take long to figure out what's going on there. And a lot of times you'll see things like, here's some of the things that I would suggest that if a foreman isn't doing currently, that's actually their job. I've walked into companies where at the coffee time, for instance, of course, all the equipment is turned off, but the compressor is still on. And I hear lots of air leaks on the airlines. So what is that saying? Well, there's meaning that there's an opportunity there to repair the leaks in the airlines, and then it's less strain on the compressor. So things like that, are you in tune to understanding that we have a lot of airline leaks and let's get them fixed? If they say, well, we're not too worried about it, the compressor, we have enough pressure on the compressor, so we don't have a problem with the airline leaks, then you understand what the culture is. The culture to me is saying that we're not too concerned about equipment repairs, right? We're only going to react to anything that breaks down, but we're not going to be proactive in fixing equipment if we see there's some issues. We're going to wait for it to break down, and then we'll react to it. Well, if that's your culture, that's fine. But I'm going to tell you that you're going to cause yourself a lot of grief, because equipment doesn't break down when you're not busy. Equipment breaks down when you've got that most important job, the most important client, the least amount of time to get it finished in, and then that important piece of equipment breaks down. So again, understanding what culture is, it's just taking a step back and looking at it with a different set of eyes.
Yeah.
I'll see things like people edging on the edge banders. The edge bander operator is very efficient. He's piling up lots of things on the edge bander, lots of products getting edged. I'll walk over, I'll feel it, and there'll be a slight, a little bit more to do on it. Maybe they have to file it now or something. So I'll ask somebody, and if the foreman's around, I'll ask the foreman and say, what's going on here? He says, oh yeah, well, we've got a buddy there on the bench that all this product is just going to go over there and he's going to file it. And I say, well, why would you do that when you have an edge bander that can actually do that function for you? Just spend another half an hour setting up the edge bander, or 20 minutes, and you won't have to do filing. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, is saying keeping costs down. Because if you're actually taking all that product that was just edged and you're sending it off to a bench to get further processed, that's costing you money. It's affecting your bottom line. I'm sorry, but that's how you have to look at it, right?
Yeah.
So those are types of things that if a foreman is in tune and the supervisor is in tune, he's going to look at that stuff that comes off the edge banner, the first 10 or 15 pieces, and he's going to say to the edge banner operator, hey, buddy, I want you to set this edge banner better than this because I don't want to have to file this stuff over at the next station. So spend another 20 minutes, and then we'll save 4 hours of filing.
Yeah.
Because, you know, sure enough, you can produce a lot of badly or quality doesn't hit the mark product, and then I have to process it further. That's going to take way more time than if I just take an extra half an hour in the edge bander. So it's that kind of understanding that really the foreman has to have to be able to address these issues, right? And you're only going to do that by walking the floor. You're not going to know that that product isn't set up, isn't edged to the right quality by sitting on your office answering emails. I'm not suggesting that the foreman isn't busy doing something, and it may even be something that upper management has told him to do, but I challenged the organization to say, I don't think that's the best use of the foreman's time. It's better that he's out on the shop floor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it comes out in so many places. People don't want to wreck the board, and so they leave an onion skin on the CNC, and then it has to get processed further. And it's just such an obvious question, but it's also part of the culture of the company. We always do it that way. So I think this goes back to your statement before that if you're looking for a new foreman, whether it's off your existing floor or somebody who you might be hiring from the outside, it's somebody who's willing to ask the questions when everybody else is just going along with the flow.
Exactly. Somebody who's wanting to challenge the status quo. And the companies that are in tune with continuous improvement, that are always wanting to push the envelope, they're always going to be questioning how we do things. And, I want to do it better a couple of months from now than we're doing it today. So what do we need to do to make those changes? Do we need, better training for people? Should we spend more time with standard operating procedures? Do I have to, shut down that piece of equipment and order that pre-mill head, that, a sharper pre-mill head for the edge bander, things like that. So it's being in tune with what's required. Being proactive is really what it means, and that doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. You have to sort of train for that and instill that in your leaders, right?
Yeah.
Some of the other things I've seen, walking through shops were, a lot of kitchen cabinet shops will have a finishing line or a separate a whole room where there's a automated finishing line, spray line. And then I see sanding happening in that room. Well, that's supposed to be a dust-free environment.
Yes.
So if culture is now that we're actually sanding in that room, we're actually incurring dust in there. And so we have the potential for a poor quality product, rework, things like that. So this is something where if the foreman is walking the floor, he can say, hey, why are you sanding in here? Sanding happens outside. We've got some sanding booth, or we've got a drawdown table outside this booth. Make sure the sanding happens out there. So it's things like that where the foreman or the supervisor, when they're on the floor, they can maintain the processes, they can maintain the quality, they can hold people accountable, and when they see people need additional training or retraining, then they can focus their efforts on that so they can bring the quality up and make sure that the processes are being maintained.
Lovely. That's good. So this conversation about let's talk about the foreman actually has a lot of depth to it. This is a very important position. And I know that I think many of our listeners have foremen. Many of them are also thinking about moving into that stage where they need a foreman and they need to start separating roles and have some role clarity and responsibility. Where I see some of the challenges is where the foreman is also doing the estimating and a little bit of project managing, and that works for a little while the company's trying to grow to that proverbial next level. But at some point, you've got to have a foreman that's a foreman, an estimator that's an estimator, and separate those two roles so your company can grow, because you've just talked about so many efficiencies on the floor that lead straight to profits. Lost profits or gained profits just by having the floor running properly.
Yeah. Well, Don, It's funny you take me back to when I first got into cabinet making, and back in the early 80s we didn't have there was no engineering department. We didn't have project managers. That all happened on the shop floor. The senior cabinet makers would probably be the person that goes out to the job site and gets the measurements.
Yeah.
Then they'd build the unit. They would manage or coordinate with the job site or the general contractor when we're going to go in and do the installation. They would probably go do the installation. So these other departments we've created to increase our volume of work and to make things more efficient, because now we have CNC routers and CNC edge banders and all these wonderful pieces of technology and equipment. But really the work still happens in the woodworking shop, on the shop floor, and that's really where the money is made. That's what creates the product, that's what finishes the product. And so that's where the effort needs to be. The big part of that effort needs to be on that production floor still, because that's the thing that makes the money for the organization, right? Those other departments are the supports to that. Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting they're not important, but the important big hub is the production floor, because that's where the work actually happens.
Well, that's what we do. We make stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Rick, if somebody's listening to this and they want to get in touch with you or find out more, or maybe you said something that really resonated, how would somebody reach you?
Well, I'll give my email address and I'll give my cell phone number, and I invite people to, if they have questions, if they have comments, if they disagree with me and say, Rick, you're out to lunch, I want to hear about that too, because I'm always learning. I've got over 35 years experience in the millwork and cabinet making trade. But every day I still learn. Somebody who's 20 or 21 years old can still teach me something, and I'm open to that. So yeah, I'm open to, if somebody has a question about what's diagnostic, TWI, I'll give you more information. So here's my telephone number. It's 780-717-8186, and I'll repeat that, 780-717-8186. And my email address is ric.ptak@fpinnovations.ca. And FP Innovations is spelled FPINNOVATIONS.
Excellent. Well, and for those of you listening, if you happen to be driving right now, when this episode goes live, there will be show notes that you can see off the website. In those show notes will be links to Rick's phone number, Rick's email address, the other podcast that I talked about where Rick brought up the Huddle, which is an excellent management communication tool. We've done a podcast on that. We'll probably do more in the future, but I'll link to that one for you, where we had Ankit Sharma from Kitply talking about his Huddle process. Rick, this has been great. I think you've uncovered a lot of things, and actually probably in a lot of cases, people are feeling pretty good, saying, okay, I think we're on track, we're doing that. But I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways I've got on this whole Foreman conversation is probably about the culture, the right attitude.
Yeah, and I think, if companies think they're doing a lot of these things, that's great. I applaud them. I would then throw the challenge out to say, never stop, because continuous improvement, you have to always improve. And if you stop continuous improvement, or you think you've done as much as you can, the problem with that, of course, is your competition probably is not. So if you're at the top of your game right now and then you turn off the faucet, maybe in 6 months you won't be at the top of your game anymore. So you have to continuously challenge yourself to say, it's great, let's pat ourselves on the back for all the improvements and all the things we're doing well already. Great. What else can we do? Let's uncover something else what we can do better at. So it's a never-ending challenge to yourself and the organization to always challenge himself to improve, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rick. I appreciate you taking the time away from your day to and your role there at Almac as well to come and join us for this. I'm sure our listeners and our viewers got a lot. Thanks, Rick. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Okay, I appreciate that. And thanks, Dom, for having me on. And thanks, everyone, for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.